She didn't imagine he was rich. A story of pain, love, courage, and fidelity. The sun that morning had a different color. It wasn't that golden hue that gladdens the heart. It was a pale yellow, tired, as if the sky itself knew the day would be heavy. Lara woke up, even before the rooster crowed, as she had done every day since she was 12 years old, when her mother fell ill and she had to take care of the house alone. Lara was 27 years old, but she carried in her eyes a life that seemed to have lasted twice as long. It wasn't bitterness that lived in that gaze. It was depth. It was the kind of look that only belongs to those who have learned to love without receiving anything in return. She lived in a small house with exposed bricks at the end of a narrow alley. The roof had a leak on the right side that sang every time it rained. Lara had already learned to place a basin in the right spot before going to bed. That leak had somehow become, in a strange way, almost a companion. Her work was simple. She sold homemade meals from a small aluminum cart every day in the central square of the town. She woke up at 4 in the morning, cooked with what she had, carried everything on the 5 o'clock bus, and stayed until 2 in the afternoon serving lunch to whoever passed by. It wasn't much, but it was hers. It was honest. That Tuesday morning, a man sat on the wooden bench near her cart. He was wearing simple clothes, worn jeans, a white cotton shirt, and old sneakers. He looked tired. There was something different about him, but Lara couldn't say what. Maybe it was the way he looked at the ground, not with sadness, but with thought. "One meal, please," he said, raising his eyes. Lara noticed that his voice was dry, like someone who hadn't drunk water for hours. She served the plate and went to get a glass of water without him asking. "I can see you're thirsty," she said simply. He looked at her as if that small gesture was something he didn't expect. He drank the water slowly, carefully, like someone who feels gratitude even for the rain. "How much is it?" he asked, taking out his wallet. "It's the price of the meal." "The water is free," Lara replied, without smiling, but with kindness. His name was Helio, but she didn't know that yet. He came back the next day, and the day after, and the day after that. For 2 weeks, every time Lara arrived at the square with her cart, he was already there, sitting on the same bench, always in the same simple clothes, always ordering the same meal, always with the same look that seemed to hold something very big inside. Lara didn't ask questions. That wasn't her way. Se listene. When he spoke, she paid real attention. Not the way people pretend to listen while thinking about the next thing they're going to say. She genuinely listened. One day, he arrived with an injury on his hand. He had cut it on the rusty gate of the place where he was staying. Lara stopped everything. Fetched the first aid kit she always carried in her bag because once a customer had gotten hurt and she had nothing to help with, and that stayed in her memory, and treated the cut right there in the square. "You didn't have to do that," he said, looking at her hands over his. "I know," she replied. "But I wanted to." At that moment, Helio felt something move inside his chest. He didn't know how to name it yet, but it was real. It was as if, after years of seeing the world from afar, someone had finally looked him in the eyes and said, "You exist, and that matters." What Lara didn't know, and what would change everything, was that Helio was not a simple man who spent his days in a square. He was the founder of one of the largest construction companies in the region. He was there, in that square, because he had lost his mother 3 months earlier, and the grief had collapsed something inside him that no amount of money could rebuild. He had left his mansion, put on the simplest clothes he could find, and decided to walk through the town without anyone knowing who he was. He wanted to feel the world the way most people feel it. He wanted to discover if there was still true kindness in a world that only saw him for what he possessed. And then he found Lara, with their carter-leaking roof, at home, her first aid kit, and that water she served without anyone asking. Sometimes the simplest gesture is what breaks the heart in the most beautiful way. Time is a strange fabric. Sometimes it passes slowly, like honey dripping, and every second feels loaded with feeling. That's how the following days passed for Lara and Helio, slowly, completely. They began to talk for real. Not about big things, about the small things in life, about the taste of well-seasoned beans, about the sound of rain on zinc tiles, about the way the sunset changes color, depending on where you are looking from. Lara had learned to distrust people, not out of malice, out of experience. Her father had left when she was 8. Her mother had gotten sick and died when she was 19, leaving her with a small but heavy hospital debt. She had loved a man at 22 who promised to stay and left without warning. She had learned, in the flesh, that love without roots is a beautiful wind while it passes, but unable to hold you when you fall. That's why she didn't allow herself to believe quickly. But there was something in Helio that disarmed the defenses she had built so carefully. He didn't try to impress her. He didn't talk about himself all the time. He didn't promise anything. He just showed up. He listened. He stayed. One day, she arrived at the square with red eyes. She tried to hide it, but Helio noticed immediately. "What happened?" he asked, with that calm voice that seemed to be in no hurry. Lara took a moment, then she told him. The owner of the little house had appeared the day before, saying he was going to sell the property. She would have 30 days to leave. 30 days. With everything she had, which wasn't much, but it was everything. "Where are you going to live?" he asked. "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. I always do," she said, with that firmness that wasn't arrogance. It was survival. Helio stayed quiet. Inside, he felt a pain that wasn't just compassion. It was anger at himself. He had empty apartments. He had enough resources to solve that situation with one phone call. But he couldn't. Not yet, because if he did it now, without her knowing who he was, it would seem like charity disguised as generosity. And Lara didn't deserve that. She deserved the truth. That night, for the first time in months, Helio cried. Not for the money he had and couldn't use without hurting her dignity, but because he had realized he was in love, for real. In that way that can't be undone, that can't be pretended not to exist. He had loved before, or thought he had, but the women who had come to him always knew who he was from the beginning. And even without wanting to, that information changed everything. It changed the smile, the gesture, the chosen word. Lara knew nothing, and that's why everything she gave was pure. 2 days later, Helio appeared at the square earlier than usual. He brought bread. Simple bakery bread, still warm. "I didn't know if you had had breakfast," he said, placing the bag on the cart. Lara looked at the bread, looked at him, felt a knot in her throat that she couldn't swallow in time. "You didn't have to," she whispered. "I know," he replied, smiling with his eyes, "but I wanted to." She recognized her own words returned to her, and that was too much. She turned her face to the other side, pretending to organize the pots, but he saw her shoulders trembling. "Lara," he called gently. She didn't answer immediately. She stayed like that, with her back turned, letting the emotion pass like a wave. Then, when she turned, her eyes were still shining, but her voice was firm. "Why do you do this?" she asked. "Why do you show up every day? Why do you treat me like this?" Helio was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because you are the only person who saw me as a human being, not for what I have or what I carry, as a human being." It was that day that he decided he would tell her. He would tell everything. But not there, not in a hurry. She deserved to know in the right way. Meanwhile, Lara's life continued to be heavy. She had found a tiny room to rent, even smaller than the little house, and was trying to save the deposit money. The cart sales had decreased that week because of non-stop rain, and her oldest neighbor, Mrs. Cecilia, had fallen ill, and Lara was helping to take care of her, which cut even more into the time she had. But Lara didn't complain. Not publicly. She saved her pains for the moments of silence at night, when she turned off the last light. There, she allowed fragility to exist. There, She allowed herself to be human. Helio, without knowing all these details, noticed she was arriving more tired, her eyes more closed, her step heavier. And that's when he did something he hadn't planned. He showed up on a Thursday afternoon with a notepad and a pen and said, "Teach me how to make beans the way you do." She laughed. It was the first time he saw her laugh for real, with her belly, with her whole face, and that was so beautiful that he stood still, just looking, like someone watching the sunrise and not wanting to miss a single second. "You've never made beans in your life?" she asked, still laughing. "Never," he admitted with total honesty. "That's your fault," she said, still smiling. "Beans are the most important thing in the world." They laughed together, and in that laughter, something was sealed between them that no words could name better than that moment. But the truth still needed to come, and it would come heavier and more necessary than ever. True love does not run from the truth. It goes toward it, eben with fear, because it knows there is no real love built on silence. The day chosen by Helio was a Sunday. There was no special reason for that day except that Sunday has something of a new beginning in the air, a lightness that the weekend carries before the world starts spinning at its usual speed again. He had asked Lara to meet him in the square, but not for lunch. To talk. She found it a bit strange. Helio had never asked for that before. It was always him arriving and her being there. It had never been scheduled. She arrived wearing a blue blouse that she saved for special days. She didn't know why she had chosen that blouse. Maybe because the heart sometimes knows things the head hasn't understood yet. Helio was there, but he wasn't wearing his usual clothes. He was well dressed, not exaggerated, but different. And there was an expression on his face that Lara had never seen. The expression of someone who is going to say something he is afraid to say. "I have to tell you something," he began. He poured everything out. He told her about his mother who had died, about the deep grief, about how it had collapsed everything inside him, about the decision to leave home, dressed in simple clothes to walk through the world without the name he carried, about the weeks in that square, and about what he had found there, unexpectedly, completely. "Because you deserve the truth before anything else," he said. Lara remained quiet for a long time, so long that Helio felt his heart in his throat. She looked at the square, at the wooden bench where he always sat, at the path her feet had walked so many times carrying the cart, and then she looked at him. "Do you think what you have changes anything?" she asked, in a voice that didn't accuse, but wanted to understand. "I don't know," he replied honestly. "That's why I'm telling you. Because if you were to leave because of this, I needed to know, now." Lara stayed silent a moment longer. "Then, when you first arrived here, your voice was dry, and I brought you water. You didn't ask me. I brought it because I thought you needed it." She paused, choosing her words. "I didn't bring it because you are rich. I didn't know. I brought it because that's what you do when someone needs it. Because that's what my mother taught me before she left." Helio felt his eyes burn. "And when you treated my hand," he began. "I did it because it hurt, and because I could help," she completed. "I didn't need anything from you to do that." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "And that's exactly what destroyed me inside, in the best possible way." Lara looked at him for a while, and then, for the first time, she reached out and touched his face, not with novella romance, with truth, with that kind of touch that says, "I see you, not what you have, not what you carry." Helio closed his eyes for a moment, and a tear fell silently. "You don't have to be ashamed of crying," she said. "Crying is not weakness. It's proof that you are still alive inside." That afternoon, they sat in the square for hours. They talked about his mother, about her mother, about the losses each had carried alone for so long, about the tiredness of being strong without a place to rest. Helio didn't make big promises that day. He didn't come with extravagant proposals. He came with the truth. And Lara, who had learned to distrust beautiful words, knew how to recognize that this was different. In the following months, life changed. but not in the way anyone could imagine. Helio didn't arrive throwing money around. He arrived by her side. He helped Lara find the larger space for her meals. Not a huge restaurant, but a small hall, with 5 tables, in the center of the town. She herself chose the name. The little house in honor of the house, with the leak that had been hers. Lara didn't abandon her apron. She didn't become another person. She continued waking up early. She continued seasoning the beans her way. The difference was that now there was a hand that reached for hers when the day weighed too much. And Señora Cecilia, the neighbor she had cared for when she fell ill, sitting at one of the 5 tables in the small restaurant, looking at Lara and Helio, talking behind the counter, whispered to herself with a smile, God never lets a good heart go hungry. On the day of their simple wedding, in the morning, with few guests and a lot of love, Helio leaned toward Lara's ear and said, You know what enchanted me about you? The beans, she replied, smiling. The water, he corrected, with eyes full. The water you brought without me asking. That's when I knew you were different from everything I had ever seen. She didn't answer with words. She rested her head on his shoulder and so closed the cycle of a story that did not begin with greatness. It began with a glass of water, with beans, with a bandage on a wounded hand, with the courage of 2 human beings to truly look at each other without filters, without fear, without lies. It began with a noble gesture from her, and it ended with the 2 of them. Together, teaches people to present themselves before revealing themselves. That tells us to show what we have before showing who we are. That values the packaging more than the content. But the true wealth of a human being is not in what they accumulate. It is in what they offer when they don't need to offer anything. It is in the glass of water given before someone asks. It is in the hand extended to heal a wound of someone you barely know. It is in honest listening when the whole world is screaming. Lara didn't know that Helio was rich, and that was exactly why she enchanted him, because she treated him as a person, not as status, not as opportunity, not as destiny, as a person. And Helio, with everything he possessed, was freer in those weeks in the square and with homemade meals than he had been in years in the mansion and meetings. Because someone finally saw him without the frame. Her noble gesture was not calculated. It was not planned. It was simply who she was. And being genuinely who you are is the most courageous and most powerful act that exists. Because true love is not attracted to what you have. It is attracted to what you are when no one is looking. To what you do when there is nothing to gain. To the kind of person you choose to be in the silence of your simple gestures. Keep this. Who you are in the small things reveals who you are in the whole. And the world, sooner or later, responds with the same measure. Be the noble gesture. Be the water that no one asked for, but that someone needed. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel. Turn on the bell so you don't miss any stories like this. Every story here is made with love to touch the soul of those who listen.